The Mannin Line with Andy Wint.
Faster Mai, good afternoon. Welcome to Mannin Line today. It's all about DEFA, Department of Environment, Food and Agriculture. And if you want to talk to the Minister, Clare Barber, Chief Exec Steve Stanley's on as well. We're on between now and 1. Just a quick word about later on this week. Daphne Kane will be along from the Climate Change Transformation Board, along with Clive Callister and Dave Sowden. And a week tomorrow, the Airport Director Gary Cobb is in with the DOI Minister Chris Thomas MHK. But today, all things food, agriculture and environment. Having said that, it is an enormous department. Clare Barber, Faster Mai, good afternoon.
Faster Mai, Andy, good afternoon to you.
How long have you been in the job now?
Oh, goodness, it's coming up to 2 years, year and a half to 2 years, yeah. Time flies.
I remember last time you were saying it was still a learning curve as well, because there are things popping up all the time.
Absolutely. I think, the scope of DEFA remains unchanged, and certainly there's very rarely a day when I don't learn something new, and I think that's one of the positives about it. But it can also be a challenge because it means I don't have the answers to everything, and I don't pretend to. Okay,
Steve Stanley, good to see you again, Steve.
Thanks for having me
now,
again.
Who's going to answer the question about ivy, Steve or Claire?
Happy to pick up on ivy. It's interesting, actually. It's one of the things. Certainly I was misinformed. I think it would be fair to say prior to coming into DEFA, and we've had a number of queries raised over the years around ivy and whether it strangles trees. And I think when you look at it, it does look like it's almost taking over. Yeah. But in reality, actually, our arboricultural officers are very much of the opinion, they live in harmony. Ivy will attach to trees, as we see quite regularly in our landscape. But actually, ivy is providing a habitat for birds and other animals. It provides berries, there's flowers, there's all the benefits from those. And the biggest challenge can be when you've got a tree that's already dead. And we know we've talked before about tree disease and the challenges we have with ash dieback, Dutch elm disease, Phytophthora ramorum, where we do have those trees that are dying or unstable, and there is ivy attached, and it can take advantage of that. Then when they displace, people can wrongly blame ivy. Right. So as a general rule, certainly from the officers with the knowledge, as it were, in DEFA would be, don't worry about ivy, don't remove ivy. The only time they would engage really with addressing ivy is if they couldn't do a proper tree inspection because of the coverage of ivy, right. Where they would then seek to remove that in a controlled manner. But actually, ivy is a good thing, brings lots of benefits, and we all, I'm sure, enjoy singing about it at Christmas.
Okay, and we'll come to loss of trees later on. But first of all, William's on the line. Hi, William. You're live with Clare Barber and Steve Stanley.
Oh, it's Victoria. Can you hear me?
I'm sorry, Victoria. Sorry, wrong line, Victoria. You're live with Clare Barber and Steve Stanley.
All right, thank you. Hello, everybody.
Hi there, Victoria.
Hi, I just wanted you to... there's a lot of talk about food security. What's your definition of food security for the Isle of Man?
So food security is another area actually where I've certainly been on a real learning curve, and there's lots of talk about food security, but really for me it falls under 4 pillars. So there's the purest form of food security is the availability of food on a day-to-day basis in a location and for individuals there, and we know that the reality on the Isle of Man is that a large amount of that is provided by our import routes, but we do have local produce, and absolutely it's right that, in my opinion, within that pillar we seek to increase the amount of local produce and therefore look at where we've got opportunities for import substitution, and that's something that DEFA are keen to work towards, and we're developing a food security plan at present. But then there's also some other elements around food security. So there's the availability of good quality food and nutrition, and the ability and awareness of people around those topics. There's also the availability of food for everyone, regardless of whether it's on the shelves, but the ability to actually access it, and then that ties into the food banks and access to food for individuals in whatever given set of circumstances they have. And then finally, there's the piece that I think probably gets talked about the most, which is what happens when all of those things can't be put in place or something goes wrong. What's our backup plan? And that's very much what we saw, I think, around COVID. We've seen to some extent, off the back of Brexit, the challenges we can have around access to food through our usual routes. And it's absolutely right that we've got plans in place around that. And there are extensive plans, actually, held within DEFA, excuse me, even talking about things such as rationing and having all of that there just in case we were to need it. But those things are the things we hope we'd never have to use, but it's absolutely right that we make sure are up to date and all the information is there.
Yeah, well, I think we should be growing a lot of our own food. I'm very much pro-farming, and I wouldn't like to see meat and dairy and eggs taken out of our diets, because I think they're essential. And even if you're a vegetarian or a vegan, I think you should be eating fruit and vegetables, well, all of us, that are grown in soil. Yep. And have we moved away from producing a lot of our own stuff as far as, growing vegetables and that? I mean, we need land, don't we? And we can't just keep building and building and building and then have nowhere to grow food.
Absolutely.
Because then we're reliant on importing, aren't we? And that's not good.
Yeah, and some of the reliance on importing, it's fair to say, is around our dietary choices and our dietary habits. So there are certainly things that are, I would suggest, in the top 10 foods that people would choose to consume, such as rice and pasta, that are not things that we're growing here or growing the core ingredients of. But saying that, I think you're absolutely right, and that's why I say, for me, within that first pillar, it's the importance for me is about us constantly looking at how we can increase the local production and consumption, and at the same time use that to substitute for imports. And some of that's really that wider conversation about what food is locally produced and what's seasonal. What things are actually here. I hark back to the good old days, and certainly I think when we reflect back to how things were, perhaps in the early part of the 20th century, the reality is that people were far more engaged and in touch with what was produced and when it was produced. And there have been some great shows on the television that talk about this, so people can understand the seasonality of fruits and vegetables and really focus in on what they can get at any time.
No, the elephant in the room, I think, is cost, because food that can be grown at scale off the Isle of Man are often a lot cheaper than stuff on the Isle of Man. So how do we square that circle?
Yeah, and I think it's interesting as well. You talked about food grown in soil, and I take that to mean food that's actually grown as opposed to engineered. But I mean, the reality is that some of the things that may make it scalable here are looking at options around hydroponics, for example, where it's not conventional farming in a field, but actually our farmers know they've got all the skills around that, and it's absolutely the right thing to have a conversation about. But some of it is around scalability, but actually those foods that we can secure to be grown here, we have a much greater confidence that the availability will be there, and it's a balance of that. But it's absolutely right that we all need to try where we can, and I recognise that there can be challenges to support that local market year round, so that when we do need it, it's there.
Okay, final word, Victoria?
Yeah, I'm very pleased that you've mentioned seasonal eating, because people, we've moved away from that, haven't we, really? And I think that's been quite a big problem with regard to health.
We have, I think it's a shame, actually, because there is an expectation that we can have access to certain fruits, certain vegetables year round, and the reality is that's not when they're in season here by any stretch. And in fact, often they're not in season in anywhere that's even vaguely close to us here. So they're getting flown in from South America, South Africa, all around the world. We're seeing stuff being flown in, and there's a huge question that has to be asked around how the climate change challenge can be addressed when we're shipping stuff around the world, when actually we could eat stuff that's seasonal for us here and now.
Okay, all right, Victoria, thanks for that point.
Thanks very much for that.
Thanks, Victoria.
Good to hear from you. Thanks for that. Just one quick word, Clare Barber, about egg production on the Isle of Man after the bird flu. Is there much egg production now on the island?
Yeah, so we still have egg production on the island, and we've got some fabulous local eggs. Certainly, I think that it's one of the products where there's absolutely no question the difference between local eggs and imported eggs. For me, I'm a big fan of all local products. I think you really do taste the difference, but the freshness of eggs is something you can't beat. My mum used to have eggs in the garden, chickens in the garden, and then eggs off the back of having chickens, and there's something pretty magical. But we do have egg producers here, and we've been putting in place a number of different legislative backstops, I suppose, to make sure that they've got support, should the worst happen. Because although we know there's been the recent case of bird flu in the UK, it is ongoing, but there was a human contracted case of bird flu. There's not been human-to-human transmission, but it's absolutely right. Although at the minute we don't have a bird flu outbreak on the island, we absolutely would be remaining vigilant, and the animal health team are very much keeping the messaging up with our poultry producers, who already, it's stuff they know. They've been doing it for years, and actually they are very much at the front face of something.
Okay, William. Hi, William. You're live with Clare Barber and Steve Stanley.
Hello, Andy. Hello, Minister.
Hi,
I'd
William.
like to know some information. Some information on Sorby Claddaghs, because I'm hearing that there's an outrageous charge you've put on that now if you want to have a season camping there.
Yeah, so one of the things we've had to do, William, obviously originally I had said that we weren't going to run Sorby Claddaghs this season while we sought to do a consultation. We listened to feedback. We heard the very strong feelings from those local businesses who would be affected by that, and we made the call to set Sorby Claddaghs up for camping, but obviously on a cost recovery basis, and that was a decision that we really was the only way we could proceed with that this year. We're constantly under challenges with tight budgets, and it was a decision that was taken. So at the minute we're charging £100 for a season permit, or £100 for TT and Grand Prix permit. It's still, I believe, competitive. It's being run by Ballamore Campsite on our behalf, and we're, as you know, and I hope you contributed, we're running a consultation in conjunction with that, and very much keen to look at what the future options might be for Solby.
Well, I believe the consultation is just about cost, isn't it?
No.
How to save.
So that's certainly not the intention, no. I believe there's free text options within the consultation, and we'd very much be keen for people to talk about how we can run Sorby Claddaghs, what it is they're looking to have at Sorby Claddaghs. But ultimately, it will need to be on a cost recovery basis, because we simply don't have a budget available to us in order to run it as we were and manage the liability. There also were some points around anti-competitive practice, and we're very conscious, obviously, of not or of being in compliance with the law within DEFA.
Right, well, I had a little bit to do with it a few years ago, 10 years plus. Mm-hmm. I was asked to join a group to look into the future of Sorby Claddaghs. Mm-hmm. After the second meeting, when politicians were involved with it, it became looking at the future of camping at Sorby Claddaghs, and that's how it ended up. But it was ran all right when your department ran it with a permit system. It had a very, very good guy going round called Peter Knowles. He was the warden, and he ran it fine, and it was about £15 a year then. Mm-hmm. I don't know where's the expenses come from now.
So there's been a colossal
amount of money.
So there's been a couple of things. One has been around having security on the site. That was a decision that was taken. There had been, I believe, some instances that I've been made aware of, but also making sure that we were covered off in terms of our occupier liability position for the site. And there also, more recently, because of the failure of the toilets, there has been an issue around using portaloos and the cost of paying for those portaloos. So there are costs that are associated with it, and we simply we're seeing an increasing amount each year in terms of the cost versus what we could bring back in for the site.
William, what do you want to see happening at Sorby Claddaghs?
To revert back to how it was run.
Thank you.
There was a wonderful guy in your department, in the department that called Graham Watson, mm-hmm. and he will have all the information, I'm sure, on what was decided some 10 years ago, and it ran all right up till COVID.
William, is it true there were some instances of bad behaviour? I know that the commissioners didn't want much to do with it because they were tired of people behaving badly there.
That's very true, but that was sorted out by, at the time when I was going, a very good police officer, and before I started going, a police Inspector Quirk and another inspector called Derek Duke, who ran the place. They came and checked it. But when we got a new officer, a new inspector, he couldn't possibly be sent or send his constables to Sulby Claddaghs because he had the whole of the north of the island. I asked him this personally, and so there was no policing getting done. They didn't even drive through. So obviously things go astray, don't they? It happens.
And I think there's a culmination of factors, and you're right to point that out, William. One of the challenges is that the police equally are running on tight budgets. There's also huge focuses now around online crime, cyber crime, financial crime that takes a huge amount of resource from the police. And the reality is that has had an impact in terms of police visibility in the nights. And you're right, there is a limited number of police officers, for example, in the north at night. And to declare a brief interest, my sister actually is a police officer, so I do have some level of insight, both from her, but also more broadly from you're talking with the constabulary and obviously being in Home Affairs actually for the last 5 years prior to coming into DEFA. So there's a culmination of factors, and I think it's absolutely imperative. We want to, I'm very much looking at this consultation with an open mind. I certainly wouldn't be averse if there was a group who wanted to establish themselves on a formal footing and wanted to look at taking on the running of the campsite on more of a basis where they take those occupier liability elements on. So if there's people, I suppose a bit of a plea really, if there are people who think that that's an option they'd like to explore, please pop it into the consultation or drop me an email. I'm very much here wanting to listen.
Okay, all right, well, William.
Just one more. If the Minister would like to look into closer at Hansard and what the past has been about Sulby Claddaghs, when permission was granted for the first people to overnight way back in the 20s, sorry, you might find a little bit more knowledge about it. It's all in Hansard if you have the time and the effort to do it.
I promise you I've spent
hours reading up
all of these bits, so it's not that I haven't read them, William. Equally, Graham's still in DEFA, Graham's still there, and very much part of the team who've been providing that insight around where we've been before. I realise that there's huge amounts of communication that's been there around Sulby, and I naively thought I would be able to come in and simply say, let's just open it up. If I'm brutally honest, when I came in as Minister, that's what I thought we'd be able to do. The reality was different, and I've had to accept that, which is why I want to do this piece of consultation work and find a longer term solution for the Claddaghs.
Okay, all right, William, thanks for calling today.
Thank you.
Thanks,
all right,
William.
Good to hear from you. And also, could you comment on, we had a text in just saying, could Clare confirm that the Sulby Claddaghs is not going to be sold off and expensive houses put there?
Absolutely, 100% categorically confirm. It's not going to be sold off.
You must have heard that. That's been mentioned many times.
Yeah, it has been mentioned, and I dispelled that at the public meeting, and I'm happy to dispel that on any occasion. That's absolutely never been the intention. It is a piece of land available for the public, and that is absolutely the right thing for it to be. The only thing that, as I say, I would consider would be providing the use of it for a local group who were formed properly through appropriate structures, if they were able to do that.
Okay, and Steve Stanley, obviously that's something that the department has to pick up. The officers have to pick up running Sulby Claddaghs. How have you found that?
I think it's fair to say it's been a challenge over the years, and trying to find the appropriate sort of setup and arrangements has been an ongoing conversation. And I think, as the Minister said, departments are under challenges around finances, and we have a cost envelope within which we have to operate all of our services and look to continually improve those. So I think the opportunity was taken with the feedback from the public meeting to see, OK, what could we do to try out for this season alongside the consultation, to hear that feedback. And I know it's been an ongoing conversation for many decades, but now is a good time, I think, to look at all of that and see what the picture can be going forward. Talking
of which, we're in a brand new financial year as well, so there'll be a brand new shiny budget in place as well. Is it what the department wanted?
I think we've all had to accept those challenges, and so we put forward our sort of cases for urgent things that we needed, one of which was about tree disease. In particular, things that are kind of on the horizon that maybe couldn't be as clearly foreseen, but we have a duty to deal with. So, the works up at Glen Helen is an example of that money being put into use. And that is an ongoing challenge that we're going to have to face.
Tree disease is a black hole, isn't it? You can pour money non-stop into tree disease.
Absolutely, and I think we have to take it on a risk basis around where the greatest potential harm could arise from those trees.
So what is happening at Glen Helen?
So the team have put together a plan whereby the first if you've driven through there, you'll see quite a lot of the work's already been undertaken. That first part of the bank has been taken away, the trees removed. There is a planting scheme to come back to follow that up. And really that's around, impact and potential dangers to the road users and the public more generally. But it's interesting to look at the history of that area. That's very much largely a man-made sort of situation that we have around Glen Helen, and we've looked at an approach that we can, think about biodiversity, think about how we can introduce trees back into there.
It was built to look pretty, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. So we have to balance that. We have to make sure that we're, as I say, fulfilling our duties as a landowner, as other landowners will have to do, but also to make sure that we get the balance right between, managing that risk, but also protecting the habitats and the general appearance of the area, which is clearly a big part of what DEFA Estate provides to the public and
How
our
long is it going to take?
So it's going to carry on post-TT, and we were hoping to have it all sort of done and dusted pre-TT. That hasn't been the case because of the complexities around sort of highway routes and road closures. But this is an ongoing situation for the department and the wider sort of challenge for government and the public around how we manage this, quite widespread, quite fast-moving, particular ash dieback, a disease which does affect trees and does cause limbs to fail due to how the whole interaction between the disease itself and then secondary pathogens into the root systems. So as I say, it's a risk basis that we have to look at that. We have, the public will be aware of the glens and the plantations and the various parks that we manage, and we try to do our very best to keep those accessible as far as we can. Now,
many people on the Isle of Man have spiritual connections with the glens and the beaches and the trees on the Isle of Man. So as a department, how do you manage that? Where does the policy come from? Where does the application come from?
So again, from that cost envelope perspective, it's a challenge because we're kind of, in a way, most of our glens are in valleys with rivers running through them. So in the winter, you see the sort of rainfall we get, and it's channeled straight through the glens ultimately. So we see path erosion, we see trees that fall in those situations, and we are constantly trying to manage that and keep routes open, keep the services available that people want to enjoy, and as you say, have long-standing memories of enjoying those areas as children often.
Okay, hi Bonzo, you're live with Clare Barber and Steve Stanley.
Hi there, yes, hello everybody.
Hi Bonzo.
Yes, hi, yes. Energy policy. What progress is DEFA making towards the implementation of renewables, in particular onshore and offshore wind?
So from DEFA's perspective, energy policy sits with us. We're running very slightly behind, happy to admit when we're not on track, but the energy strategy was due March 23, and that's imminently. It's in its path going to council of ministers at present. We've done some workshops around that, but actually the implementation is very much a multi-agency, and I think we talked about this last time we were on, Bonzo. That work's still ongoing. MUA, obviously, DOI, DEFA. It really isn't as straightforward as it just being DEFA, and actually it almost to the point it needs to have its own board, I think, around some of the work on energy. But we've got a really committed team within DEFA putting our piece of work together and acknowledging that actually when we put that strategy out, some of it will be the stuff we're confident on, the stuff that absolutely is where it needs to be, and the other stuff will be some of the emerging policy positions, because there are definitely some areas within energy policy where we're not at a position to absolutely put our stake in the ground and say either yes or no to something, because there's simply new evidence coming out day by day.
Okay. I mean, you've outlined one of the problems yourself in that it is a multi-agency thing, so it is a bit of a herding cats problem. And when you have people like Orsted, for example, who are going to offer the island seabed leasing revenue, in particular, we've been speaking on this and other editions of the programme about the fact that government doesn't have any money. And yet there's an organisation which would, like to say, shut up and take our money. We'd like to give you £100 million a year in seabed leasing. And also when it comes to onshore wind, quite a number of developers have been offering a variety of schemes which would then have them bearing the capital cost, and then having a power purchase agreement with Manx Utilities, so that Manx Utilities weren't the generator. But there seems to be some form of resistance within Manx Utilities about that, and that they seem to have their particular idea that they must be in charge of generation. Now, they were talking about, in their scheme, about 20 megawatts, I think, of onshore wind. Now, I don't know where they're going to get the money for that, because, of course, like every other government department, they don't have any money. So I don't see things happening at the pace and at the scale that they need to, unless, as you so rightly point out, there is some new kind of centralised board which has been given remit to go for it and go and do it.
So there absolutely is the remit to go for it and go and do it, but it's not at the minute a formalised board, I think, would be where I'm at. But very much we've been looking at how we can break down the challenges of working when there's a number of different groups with different different and very important to be heard perspectives. Certainly some of the work we've done around energy strategy is exactly that piece you talk about, Bonzo. The either taking private capital investment with a power purchase agreement, or having public capital investment, and then the control and looking at the balance between that. There's certainly challenges around the feed-in to the grid, and some of the things around grid stability have been awaiting external reports which MU have commissioned and are now available. So there's a lot of work, some of it way more technical than I think I'll ever understand on energy generation, if I'm brutally honest.
But in terms of practical matters, where does DEFA sit in terms of responsibility for this?
So DEFA is responsible for creating the energy strategy and energy policy, but the delivery doesn't sit within DEFA. So there's a DFE input, because absolutely, as you say, there's a revenue generation opportunity. It ties in with the economic strategy, certainly with the offshore wind opportunities. And as Bonzo said, we've certainly got Ørsted there, but there's opportunities through marine spatial planning of looking at other areas in our territorial seabeds too. So it really is a huge piece of work. The commitment for the onshore renewables by 2026 has been laid down. That's with 20 megawatts of onshore wind and 10 megawatts of solar is the current projected breakdown. And there is a huge amount of work going on behind the scenes. But I agree, there is an absolute need to work at pace, which is why the energy policy paper is on its route absolutely at present, having had those workshops to make sure we know everyone's bought into where we are.
A question on behalf of the layperson then. If, as Bonzo said, Ørsted is sitting there with a big bag of money ready to give the Isle of Man, why are we hanging around?
So we're working with Ørsted already. I know that there's been a lot of progress in that regard. There's also been gap analysis done around where there may be need for legislation, depending what might happen. Certainly in terms of territorial waters, health and safety legislation, etc. But I believe the government are in a strong position in terms of that, and absolutely those doors are wide open and good conversations that we're having.
Okay, final word, Bonzo.
Yes, well, I look forward to the energy strategy report coming out. Will that be very soon? Or
I hope so.
Well, yes, is it going to be this side of the summer recess, or into the next Tynwald session?
So I think it should be published this side of the summer recess. Yeah.
All right. Well, that's. I look forward to reading that.
Okay. All right, Bonzo. Good to hear from you. Thank you. Got another question. What happened with the flour mill in December last year? DEFA said it will be publishing a report on the future of the flour mill in the first quarter of 2023.
So we had a report around future options. What DEFA has sought to do then is work with stakeholders to make sure that their voice is heard within that paper, and that has now gone to Treasury for them to make a decision around the future of the flour mill.
So it's down to Treasury?
Yeah, ultimately it's a Treasury-owned company, so it will be their decision. But what we've done is make sure that the voice of the stakeholders, which goes beyond the milling wheat growers and also the bakeries, to make sure that's heard, and also look at it in the context of food security and food sovereignty. Okay,
Julian, hi, you're live with Clare Barber and Steve Stanley.
Hi, Andy, and hi, Claire, and hi, Steve.
Hi, Julian.
Quick question for Claire. You mentioned earlier, I think, to Victoria when she called in about increasing local food produce. I'm just interested to know your opinion on the potential touted mass fluoridation of drinking water on the Isle of Man, particularly the double whammy of drinking the water and then the secondary ingestion through agricultural sources like irrigation of plants, milk and dairy, not to mention the existing significant levels of fluoride that's found in tea. And there are many researchers that are concerned with fluoride's negative effects on some subsets of the population, like bone damage in the elderly, malformation of bones in infants, and people who've got deficiencies in calcium and magnesium and vitamin C, or cardiovascular or kidney problems. I'm just wondering, as Agricultural Minister, do you have any concerns regarding mass fluoridation in the food chains?
So, I mean, from my perspective, I think there's two key points I'd want to draw out. One is that because we're importing food, we have very little control over that, because there are countries we're importing from which do put fluoride in water. So actually I think there's a really important conversation more broadly about what we're doing here and why we're choosing to do it. But for me, the points you raised, Julian, are exactly why I supported public health being able to go away and do a formal research paper on the topic to look at all those elements and to come back with an informed view that we could then have a debate on.
Yeah, and the other little point on that particular subject is the fluoride that they're talking about is fluorosilicic acid, which is a byproduct waste of fertilizer production. Why would we pay £2 million for that, plus ongoing hundreds of thousands?
So I don't know how I don't know the MU costings except for the answer that was given the other week in Parliament. But certainly, from my perspective, that's absolutely why we need a research paper on this. I certainly grew up in an area where we had fluoride in our water, and no question the statistics are pretty clear in terms of fluoride in water. But that also then needs to be tied in with looking at the number of dentists per capita, the availability of dentists for children, which again I would argue the UK is not in a brilliant place either. They may be in a slightly better place than us, but they're certainly not in a position where everyone can easily access dentists across the whole of the United Kingdom. But for me, absolutely, this is why there was an absolute need to have a proper review from public health.
Right. Last little tiny quick question. The Arup C40 Cities report, the one that's been used by a lot of cities around the world, what's your take on their page which says that they want rid of all dairy and meat in the population, so that basically they'll either massive reductions or removal completely?
I think there's lots of conversation around plant-based diets, around reduction of red meat, around reduction of dairy consumption more broadly. And for me, it's about looking at your diet more generally, understanding the positives and the negatives. And I think where people are choosing to have dairy and have red meat, they should, where possible, seek to have that where they can trace the source it's come from and understand where that meat comes from, the quality of that meat, the sustainability of that meat, and ultimately for the majority of people that comes down to buying local produce. So I think there is a conversation to be had, but I don't think it's as simple as switching, for example, to just stopping red meat and dairy production by any stretch of the imagination. We've got really good industries, small scale, grass-fed industries on the Isle of Man. There's always things we can do to improve, but absolutely I think we've got a really great industry in terms of our farming sector that we should be looking to support.
Okay, all right, thanks Julian.
Thanks very much.
Thanks Julian.
Good to hear from you. It's 20 to 1 on Manx Radio. Clare Barber just got a message in just saying there's this 15-minute city that's going to be happening in Douglas Central. Any plans for a 15-minute city brownfield development by Manx Development Corporation in Douglas East?
Well, we've definitely got a few sites available within Douglas East. I think the key for me is looking at how we're using our brownfield sites, and actually the Built Environment Reform Programme's very much looking at what we can do to unpick some of those challenges. I know we talked about it briefly last time because I couldn't remember I couldn't remember what it stood for, and I think I threw out burp at the end just to finish us off nicely, but there's a lot of work going on there about how we can unpick planning policy, how we can look at making those communities making brownfield sites work for us rather than being blots on the landscape. And as I say, Douglas East has its fair share.
Whereabouts is there in Douglas East?
We've got Summerland, obviously the one that's most talked about. We've got Lord Street Complex. There's the old Park Road school site, the old prison site. There's a number of others along the promenade that certainly fall into that category. There really are a good chunk within Douglas East for what is geographically a small constituency, and really the first thing people see when they get off the boat, certainly.
Okay, one for Steve Stanley just says DEFA's planting woodland trees. Which trees are being planted? Do you know what they are?
Ooh, there's a question. So certainly native to the island. So we have documentation that people can see online, which will tell people what sort of trees to plant around the island that are native species and sort of appropriate.
What's the website?
On our DEFA website.
DEFA.
The send you the link if you want.
Yeah, we can send you the link and we can add it onto the website. Maybe.
Okay, and just one other question is: have we ever thought of planting wild fruit trees across the Isle of Man?
I've got a feeling that list may include some wild fruit trees. I think it
certainly
does.
Up at the Arboretum, when we have done plantings, there have been some wild fruit trees. Now, whether they're wild fruit that are edible fruits, because I know when I went to, oh my goodness, where's the oranges place? In Mallorca, where you go and there's orange trees everywhere and it looks glorious and these huge, juicy, beautiful oranges.
Yes.
And I made the terrible mistake of taking one from the tree and thinking I'll have that with my lunch when I was there many years ago, and discovered that they're only good for marmalade. So I think there's a balance, but certainly there are options. And I know the concept of community orchards, for example, is something that's been discussed both in the context of food security and also just there's something quite special, I think, about community gardens and community orchards.
Okay, live today with DEFA Steve Stanley, the interim chief exec, and Clare Barber MHK, the minister, on till 1.
It's the King's Spa's 5th birthday, and with some amazing celebratory offers, we'll make you feel like royalty. Our unique new VIP card will let you celebrate our birthday year in style, with prestige access and a range of events, wellness weekday spas, afternoon teas and priority lunch bookings on Wednesdays and Fridays. Visit kingspa.im for all the details. The King's Spa, King Edward Golf Club, Onken, celebrating 5 years of wellness.
When you need a fitting memorial or headstone for a loved one, contact Manx Memorials in Peel. This long-standing family-run Manx company offer a wide range of granite and marble headstones and memorials, along with an island-wide inscription and renovation service. Manx Memorial's skilled professionals will take the time to help you choose a suitable memorial, and we're proud to say we'll beat other local quotes. Call 843 861 or email matthew@manxmemorials.co.uk.
The Ginger Hall has it all. Whether you want a relaxing pub with a superb drink selection, fantastic food from the Manx Country Kitchen to eat in or take away, including bar baskets from 5 p.m. Friday and Saturday, and Sunday roasts from noon, to great live music, even event space, then you'll find it at the iconic Ginger Hall Hotel. For all the latest news, events and more, including Manx Country Kitchen's tasty menus, check out the Ginger Hall on social media. The Ginger Hall really does have it all.
Just Care products for mobility solutions.
As the island's exclusive stockists of the Cosy Feet footwear range, Just Care products have a wide choice of Cosy Feet shoes and slippers for you to try. Highly recommended by healthcare professionals. Come and try a pair of Cosy Feet today at Just Care products. Find us behind B&Q, or for more information, give us a call on
627 177.
The Royal Air Force's P-8 Poseidon maritime patrol aircraft is one of the most state-of-the-art aircraft flying today. As part of the Battle of the Atlantic 80th commemorations, a P-8 Poseidon jet from RAF Lossiemouth will be flying overhead Queen's Pier in Ramsey this Tuesday afternoon at 3. Come and watch the flypast from Queen's Pier itself, which is open from 2. And don't forget to bring a radio tuned to 1368 AM or catch us online from around 2:50 to catch all the action as it happens on your nation station, Manx Radio.
The Mannin Line with Andy Wint.
With Clare Barber MHK, the minister from DEFA, and her interim chief exec, Steve Stanley. Juan, you're live with DEFA today.
Hey, good afternoon, Andy. Afternoon, Claire. Afternoon, Steve.
Ewan.
Afternoon.
Hi. I think probably it was about 12 months ago we last spoke on the programme. I think you were on, and I was pleased at your upbeat presentation there that you give Julian at the end with support for farming. Mm-hmm. And I follow quite closely, like the stuff the factual stuff that's hidden from the general media, which seems to be the systematic destruction of farming in the Netherlands at the moment, which is an obvious big main food source for Europe, and now it's spreading into Germany. And obviously following an agenda by globalist unelected government for blockization of foodstuffs. So taking it back to local, there was a good documentary recently on, if anyone wants to look at it, agriland.ie on farming, which was produced by Ewan Turner from Energy Media. I think you've done a presentation on that as well, I think, yep. Claire. Mm-hmm. And I note generally what the farmers were talking about when they were interviewed on there, on the over-regulation of the sector from government, and also the problems at the abattoir, which I think we spoke about 12 months ago as well, and the problems still seem to be there. Now, I'm talking to a couple of farmers this week on, having to transport beasts away, because when they're ready, they have to go straight away, and the abattoir is not able to do this at the moment. So there seems to be problems, and this seems to be like worldwide problems. I spoke to people in many different places about over-regulation on farming, and the will of government to take dairy and meat forward into the future, and of course going into our food sustainability.
Okay, well, that question first of all, Clare Barber. Yes,
I think you make some great points, Ewan, and certainly in our regular conversations with the MNFU and more broadly with all farmers, I recognise they're not all in the union, but certainly the MNFU provides a voice that we regularly do meet with, and there has been talk about regulation and certainly form-filling bureaucracy, and we're really looking at where we can make that easier. Sometimes it takes a little more time than I would like, and I know certainly more time than the MNFU and the farmers I talk with would like. But reducing the paperwork, reducing the burden in terms of what's needed, in terms of accessing grants, in terms of accessing ADS, AES payments, etc., is something I think is really important. We need to make it easier to farm. We know that there are challenges around rising import costs. I appreciate that some of those have come down a little bit, but they remain significantly higher than they were at the same time a couple of years ago. So I think there is something within the agriculture strategy for me, and that's something that we want. That's why we've really taken the time and taken feedback from the sector about slowing that down a little bit to make sure we get it right. Ultimately, it's there for 10 years. We've also had some independent research carried out looking into feedback from the sector on the island, working through stakeholders and also allowing engagement from all of those people who are farming here in the Isle of Man so that they could feed in, and then benchmarking that against what's in place elsewhere. And I think that for me, having read that report, what comes over is that we're not a million miles away from where we need to be, but absolutely it's right that we look at that in the context of climate change, and we look at that in the context of energy provision, because there's obviously a regular conversation about what we're using our land for, and it feels almost like it's all an either or, but sometimes I think there are some opportunities to do a little bit of everything if we get it right, and it's really important.
I'll ask you to speak on behalf of the entire world of agriculture here. Is there an agenda to get rid of agriculture in certain places? We've seen this well-documented scenario in Holland. Is there an anti-agriculture sector of politics?
I think we've seen, as you say, in some places there is an anti certain parts of agriculture. But actually, what I see is an agriculture industry, certainly on the Isle of Man, where every piece is reliant on all the other bits. And actually, if you take away one part, everything suffers. So it's about making sure that we create that sustainability in that overall cycle. And I think we absolutely, in the context of food security, have to be aware of what's happening elsewhere, both in regard to political change we've seen in some areas, but also climate change. There are certainly more instances happening of drought in areas where we might get rice, for example. We are seeing some significant challenges over the change in temperature and products no longer being able to be grown in certain areas. Equally, in terms of different insects or animals that are now causing more issue at more times of the year and therefore having a bigger impact. And ultimately, there is a knock-on effect because we are so heavily reliant on food travelling around the world to feed the world, because we're not using that local seasonal produce anymore.
Okay.
So there is, I think, a very big picture around that. You just touched on the abattoir, and I'll just pick up on that because obviously it's been a significant piece of work. We're not 100% where we need to be yet. I make no pretense of that, and I certainly have frustrations. I know we cancelled the cattle intake 2 weeks ago. I supported that decision. It was the only decision we had in the plant, but I was exceptionally frustrated that we had to make that call.
What was the reason?
Staffing. A knock-on impact of a number of bank holidays that had happened, so we'd had shorter weeks to be able to manage, and ultimately we just didn't have enough staff in on a certain day to be able to manage that kill safely, and we have to make a call based on what we can effectively deliver. I think we need to get to a position where that doesn't happen. We managed to increase the number of cattle intake the following week, but I appreciate that the additional week of having to feed those animals and stable those animals, that's a cost to the farmer, and that affects the bottom line. So I'm very, very aware of that. Good news that I am able to bring, though, is that we have recruited the managing director role for the plant, and there'll be information coming out very soon with details of them. But they do have 16 years experience within the sector. They have links with the island, although they are moving to the island, and I'm really excited. I think it's going to be a great appointment, and I'm really looking forward to working with them to really bring the meat plant to where it needs to be.
Okay, all right, thanks, Ewan.
Cheers, Andy.
Good to hear from you. I want to go to Wilf now. Wilf, you're live with DEFA today, Wilf.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, what I'm on about, last month at the Commissioners' meeting, I asked for the corner of South Beach to be cleaned, because when the tide is in, we've got very little beach left, and that's where everybody sits. I counted over 200 people last summer sitting on that particular bit. Now then, it's covered with rotten seaweed and rubbish, and our commissioners have totally refused to clean it, and it's their responsible to clean it, because I've phoned up Chief of Harbours and they said the commissioners, that's their job to clean it. I remember them cleaning it 40 years ago with my old digger, when I had a digger. Now, they haven't done it since. And I asked to get it clean, and they said, no, if it's man-made rubbish, we clean that. But if it's anything fetched in from the sea, we don't have to do that because it's brought in by the sea. Now, it's a kind of a dead corner. Everything gets washed into that corner when the tide's in. And that's the only bit of beach that's left. The rest of the beach is totally clean when the tide goes out. But that's the bit where everybody sits. And I want it cleaned, and it's the kids are going to break up shortly for the summer, and they'll all be down there, and the seaweed is down there, and it's stinking, and they refuse to clean it. And they come up with some rubbish about, oh, well, the birds nesting on it. There are no birds nesting on it. I've been down and checked, and I know about bird life. That's fair enough. But the thing is, there's nothing there. When birds nest on it is when you let it build up high enough that it's out of high water mark, then they nest on it. But it wants scraping back. And the last time it was done, 40 years ago.
Okay. Is that a DEFA matter, Steve Stanley?
So I don't believe it is. It sounds like through the correspondence that Will's had with the commissioners, he's ascertained it's the commissioner's responsibility. So I wouldn't really want to comment on those operational side of things, but obviously we've talked about, I think you mentioned it was 40 years since the last time that's been done. I'm guessing they have their own budget challenges around where they dedicate their services. but it's not something that we would get directly involved in. I know there's a link to wildlife, but it's not something I'm aware of as something that's been raised within DEFA.
Does DEFA ever clear beaches?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
No, although we have previously also you work with beach buddies, though, for example, and we're looking at putting out a new option for a contract to fulfil those areas, which is more about surveying beaches for waste, to make sure that we've got that information and we can feed that into the appropriate international agencies and be part of the statistics.
Okay, it'd be nice to see how that pans out. Finally, David, you've got about 90 seconds, David.
No, I can do it. Can I ask the department anyway, regarding the Mounts Housing Development Corporation, what's the interest between yourselves and that development, and how is it separated? Why aren't we having a planning inspector judging the planning application, the main road? And the final thing from me was, Mr. Stanley should get the job. Move on.
Okay. We are. Yes. So our Manx Development Corporation getting an easy ride because it's an at-arm's length government organisation on planning?
So no, absolutely not. There's clear frameworks laid out around planning, and they are being followed. Manx Development Corporation is a company owned by Treasury. There are very clear rules as to what has to be raised into an inspector, and this will simply follow the same process as any other private, public, or any other development. The one exception is any DEFA developments. Anything on DEFA land or by DEFA always goes to a call-in process, because it would not be appropriate ever for us to make an assessment against our own application.
Okay, and I said we were going to get to this. We've got about 20 seconds. How many trees are actually dying on the Isle of Man, Clare Barber?
Oh my goodness. I mean, we've said that up to 50% of the existing trees could be affected by tree disease. A lot of that is about my officers going out, taking an educated guess based on what they can see and what they know. But I think the point I would like to get across is it is a significant number, and our landscapes will absolutely change.
Okay, I've worked it out, by the way. The DEFA website, if you go to gov.im/DEFA, DEFA, and you'll find out there exactly. So there we are. Steve Stanley definitely getting the job as Chief Executive.
He is fabulous.
Yes, all right. Thanks for being with us today. Thanks for all those questions. As we got through about 10% of what we should have done. Will you pop back before Christmas?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's get a date in the diary, Andy.
Lovely. Thanks for being with us today. It's been DEFA all the way with Steve Stanley and Clare Barber. And Wednesday, Daphne Kane is here with the Climate Change Transformation Ball, which means tomorrow it's an open line from 12 through till 1. Thanks to Howie Kane and Chris Quirk on the phones today.
WINT